Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this session of the webinar. My name is Tebalotati, and I'll be your host for today. And we will be running through this webinar sessions together. Colleagues, educators, educational officers, and all other guests who have joined us, as well as our presenters, welcome to this particular session. On a biannual basis, the Department of Science and Innovation, together with NRF SASTA, we organize and host the STEMI Community of Practice Conference. The conference serves as a platform to engage for engagement in innovation ideas that can be transformed into actions, for sharing of best practices, and for collaborative problem solving around issues pertaining to STEMI education. Now, for us to be able to run this conference, we organize and run webinar sessions as a build-up to the conference. This webinar is the 5th webinar that we are having at the moment, and which is a webinar organized mostly for educators. We have in the past had a webinar for higher education institutions and professional bodies. We also had a webinar for the Department of Science and Innovation entities, also for the science centers. As I said, at the moment, today we are having our webinar, which is focusing mainly on educators. Now, this webinar, as we said, it's building up towards the conference that we will be holding, that will be held in July. One of my colleagues during their presentation, they will elaborate more on this conference. And on that note, I would like to welcome you. And I want you to feel free when there is time for engagements, please feel free to engage. And I think we'll be able to move smoothly on that one. I have the following on our program, which is the opening and welcome, which is what I'm currently doing, followed by the STEMI COP background and objectives, as well as the 2023 Community of Practice Conference theme and sub-themes. These two topics will be shared by Mr. Lesh, who is the Deputy Director from the Department of Science and Innovation. And we also have our guest speaker that I will introduce later. And also we have the role of educators, mentors, and coaches in science engagement initiatives and STEMI COP conference. That's how our program will be running. Now, without wasting too much time, as we know that time is very precious, I'm going to allow our first presenter, Mr. Berson Lesh, to take over and give us the presentation. Over to you, Mr. Lesh.
Thank you, Tabalo. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending our webinar for educators. So I'm going to just give an overview of the stakeholders involved with our conference. So my outline of my presentation, it's giving some policy context, then our stakeholders, and then the broader community of practice stakeholders being identified. So all our work at the Department of Science and Innovation, as well as the work done through SASTA, is driven by a document or a policy that was adopted in 2015, the Science Engagement Strategy. So this is our marching orders. We get it from here. So it asks, or it strives for a society that is scientifically literate, that people who would then be able to critically engage with science towards forming independent opinions about science, and especially science issues. And this is our big goal that we are working towards, where not only school-going youth, but the general public have a much more better understanding of scientific matters, so that they can actually be active citizens concerning science issues. So the science engagement strategy identifies STEMI, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and innovation, Olympiads, competitions, to its main purpose being to physically and mentally engage learners in STEM. So Olympiads are very unique activities where it's not only a mental activity, but it's also where they can physically get involved, building projects and stuff like that. And Olympiads have, it's a unique position that we must start using more often in many more places around the country. So these are our main stakeholder organizations: the Department of Science and Innovation that funds the program, the National Research Foundation's business unit, the South African Agency for Science and Technology Advancement, SASTA. And then we have an association for Olympiad organizers called STEMI, the Association for Science, Technology, Engineering, Mathematics, and Innovation, Olympiads and Competitions. That's the full name. And then we also work with the South African Mathematics Foundation, the custodians also of mathematics. So the SASTA was identified as the national coordinator for science engagement in the country. And that is why we are working very closely with SASTA. And SASTA has got a range of responsibilities, and I'm not going to unpack that, but they do lots of work on behalf of the department as well as on behalf of the NRF. So the association was formed in 2015, and it consists of various members. It's a national organization and it's a non-profit. It has a constitution and a code of conduct, and there's approximately about 28 member organizations, and these are organizations organizing Olympiads and competitions in nationally, some of them in a region, some maybe in only one town or one city or one province, but they are of various sizes. And the types of organizations, they focus on robotics, some do research, some do applications like with computers, some are quizzes, some are paper-based Olympiads. So it's a range of activities in that 28 member organizations. So yeah, the Mathematics Foundation, they're the custodians of mathematics, and they have two professional bodies working with them: the Association for Mathematics Educators of Southern Africa, AMISA, a well-known organization, and then also the South African Mathematics Society, and those are the academics, the mathematicians at universities. These are our stakeholder groups represented in our community of practice. It's academics at universities, I would say, professional bodies, like let's say the Association for Chemistry or Physics. The business sector are sponsors, the Olympiad competitions and organizers, they definitely a major stakeholder. Educators, the people on this webinar today, learners, science councils. These are entities that work with the department. They do research on behalf of the department, other government departments, and then we also work closely with science centers. So science centers have been invited to the conference since the beginning. So that is my overview of the stakeholders. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lesh. I think on the very same platform, I'm going to allow you to go to your second presentation, and then we can take 5 minutes of questions and answers if there are any, and then we continue with our program. Thank you, Mr. Lesh.
Thanks, Tabalo. Okay, so yeah, so let's go to our little bit of history of this conference. So this year we are hosting from the 4th to the 6th of July, as we call it, the STEMI Community of Practice Conference. Our theme for this year is preparing learners from disadvantaged communities for the future of work through STEMI Olympiads and competitions. So this is our theme, and the topics, the discussions, the papers will then be addressing this overall theme. So the conference is dedicated for the advancement of STEMI, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and innovation, through the Olympiad movements of our country by creating a community of practice where we hopefully often identify best practices. So that's the purpose. Those are the stakeholders which I've already identified in the previous presentation, involved with the community of practice. So community of practice is where people start working together. They share ideas, they share knowledge, they come up with their collective intelligence. They obviously work towards common goals and themes like we have at the conference, and we build it together over time. And that is what this community of practice is about, and the conference is the highlight of the work done in this community. So in 2015, a consultative forum was formed, and that gave rise to the idea that we should actually get together more often. And from 2016 to 2019, there was an annual conference. And that then in 2020 and the COVID situation, a decision was taken to move the conference to be held every 2 years. So it's a biennial conference at the moment. So in 2021 was our last conference, and that was an online event, while the 2023 conference will be hybrid, the new word that everybody's using these days. So some of our keynote speakers in the past include some known individuals, from overseas too. We've had 2 international speakers, as well as local well-known colleagues. So the conference started in 2016 with a delegation group of about 112 only, and it was a steady growth. In 2019, the last in-person conference, we had about 241 delegates. And in 2021, as I've said, there was the online, and there we reached 900 delegates. And that the power of online came through there. And I think we would really love to continue in that vein, to use technology to get more and more people involved with the conference. So yes, the growth that we are aiming to advance to by profiling and publishing more academic papers. There's not been a big uptake in academia, meaning researchers to do work on Olympiads and competitions, but we are steadily getting more people to do that. We love to see more universities involved, other government departments, researchers and scientists, especially from universities and science councils, then professional bodies that I think this community that we are talking to today would be involved with. And then, yes, as underlined, the educator and learner engagement during the conference is also that we would love to increase. It's not been in the past, many educators were not able to, but since 2021, we moved the conference to during the school holidays. And that is what we are hoping to get more educator and, if possible, also learner engagement. And then also working towards getting international speakers and participants. So our conference objectives, our program director mentioned some of it already. So we're working on building towards building a STEMI-driven culture, working together and use the conference as a platform for collaborative problem solving, to get people and organizations to work together and develop tools to improve the connection between society and science, and then assist in transforming innovative ideas into best practice, benchmarked practices. So yeah, it's that is what we are working towards, and it's a process which is not done overnight. It's a long-term goal that we are working towards. So our conference has got then the following sub-themes: transforming the landscape through partnerships and collaborations. So this is a theme or a sub-theme. We've had this as a major theme previously, so we go back to some themes that are not exhausted, and we need to revisit them and build more knowledge and discussions around that. So transforming the landscape through partnerships and collaborations, a very important sub-theme. Then the skills for the future of work. This is probably the one big thing that so many of us are concerned about. And teachers and the learners in the schooling system, even people in university, we are all worried about what will the future of work look like. And our work in maths and science and engineering, mathematics, we need to address the skills associated for this future of work. So we're definitely going to focus on that as part of the conference. Then bridging the digital divide, which we are aware of, towards an education without boundaries. Yeah, that's the big one. In this world where being connected is what it's, you're going to fall behind if you are not connected. And what can the Olympiads and competitions and associated activities assist in bridging that divide? And then last, fourth topic or sub-theme is volunteerism. Also a theme that is recurring in our conferences, a vehicle for sustainable growth. The movement in Olympiads and competitions and fairs that are hosted, we know that there must be a form of volunteerism amongst various members of stakeholders, among our teachers, our curriculum advisors, parents, scientists, researchers, etc. So those are the things that we are going to, those are the 4 sub-themes for our conference. So types of presentations, there will be academic papers. These are the rigorous scientific papers, then non-research papers, which maybe not so academically rigor, but it would be, it's obviously within the themes and may not be published but the first group, the academic papers, are possible to be published in peer-reviewed journals. Then we'll have panel discussions, we'll have workshop, demonstration workshops, and also poster presentation. So these are the types of activities at the conference. So yeah, I've already started with the sub-themes. Yeah, how can we use partnerships and collaborations to reach those disadvantaged communities that we are all talking about, so they can benefit, so that they can be ready for the future of STEM-related work. So that is a big challenge we hope this conference will address. As already mentioned, the skills for the future of work, the technological advances, we know it's so rapid, and the topic of 21st century skills being used, developed, and advanced amongst the participants of Olympiads and competitions. How can these Olympiads and competitions equip, especially the learners and participants from disadvantaged and marginalized communities, with these 21st century skills, so that they can be prepared for the future of work? And then, yes, how can we use Olympiads and competitions to reduce this digital divide experienced by so many learners in those disadvantaged communities? So what are those technologies that can be used to do that? And lastly, working towards the self-sustainability of initiatives, and that more and more teachers, scientists, parents, researchers, and others, alumni of Olympiads, meaning former participants, can get involved to be there to build this culture of volunteerism, to advance the Olympiads and competitions through coaching, mentoring, and other support that they can give to the Olympiads movement. So those are our 4 sub-themes that I've unpacked. So that is, that was the way people could register. The closing date for papers have already passed long time. But yeah, so we hope to then see you between the 4th and the 6th of July. And our 2 colleagues who's on the call today, Bachilo and Simon, are the 2 colleagues that you can direct any inquiries to concerning the conference. I'm giving you a second to get that for email contacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lesh, for that presentation. I believe our colleagues did take notes and they have jotted down their questions, but we are not going to allow questions for now. We are going to continue with our presentations. Only the guest speaker is the one that I will allow questions immediately after he has spoken, and then the rest of the questions will be answered when all our presenters have presented. Now, the next presenter that I want us to have and give attention to, which is our guest speaker, will be talking on the topic titled Complexity and Pragmatism, the Mobius Strip of Competitions and Teaching. And she is currently a senior lecturer at Stellenbosch University Department of Curriculum Studies, where she teaches mathematics education courses at various levels. Her research and her practice is aimed at the question of how individual reasoning can be used as the bedrock of mathematical reasoning and how such reasoning can become habits of a society. And our guest speaker for today is none other than Dr. Erna Lampen. Welcome, Dr. Lampen, and we welcome you, and you can now take over and give your presentation. Thank you.
I thank you. I am preparing to share my screen. There we go. Colleagues, I am honored to talk to you this afternoon on a topic that is close to my heart, almost at the end of my career, and that brings together so much evidence from various fields: psychology, cognitive psychology, educational psychology, and educational practice, and history of learning and teaching and of mathematics. I want to talk to you about viewing teaching and learning of mathematics as a complex endeavor. So to just give an overview of the talk today, and I will now stop my video so that you have access to the screen only. I want to give a quick bird's eye view on what it means to know and what it has meant to know through the ages. Now, when we talk about 21st century skills, and way back, I will not go all the way back, but perhaps to the Western society culture of what does it mean to say we know. I want to quickly go over what learning meant, how it changed from the privilege of so-called reading at the feet of a master to math education, who has to cater for various levels of ability, interests, attitudes, and beliefs. And then we have to consider in today's age, now what is mathematics really? What is the subject that we now want to teach in the age of robots that can do the calculations much quicker than we can? Then I will give a complex system view on mathematics, learning and teaching, and think with you what keeps a complex system healthy. And hopefully through all of this, we will draw implications for school learning and for competitions and show that they cannot support each other as being on both sides of a Möbius strip if we keep them apart. So what does it mean to know through the ages? I'm turning to Greek Hellenistic philosophy and mathematics around 420 before Christ up to 267 in the current era. There were two main thrusts of what it means to learn and to know. Plato said all learning is towards reaching an ideal, the ideal, but that knowledge is innate. It's infallible, in other words, true, and it represents the real, of which things that we experience on earth through our senses are just shadows. Plato said learning is the development of ideas that already reside in the soul. He says the senses can bring us no knowledge, only a degree of belief. In contrast, Aristotle says all knowledge begins with sense perception. We are embodied, say, modern adherents of this philosophy. We cannot but know through our bodies. But Aristotle said knowledge is objectively true. So in other words, it's not just dependent on my own senses, but my own senses must experience that objective truth as necessary. So I must want to know it, and it must make sense in terms of causes and causal connections. Already Aristotle distinguished three forms of knowledge: scientific knowledge, skills and crafts, and then practical wisdom, how we apply scientific knowledge, skills and crafts in our everyday lives. So this, you can see that what we work with today has a long history, and even in the other traditions, which we might call Eastern traditions, this knowledge goes even further back. But what does it mean to use now? I asked you on the Mentimeter, what do you think it means? What's the influence of ChatGPT-4 on teaching and learning? Well, I find it very interesting that in January 2023, there was a call or opinions on ChatGPT 3 or 3.5 that it cannot do mathematics because it isn't a calculator. It deals with text and it can tell stories and have arguments. But by 15 March, just 2 months later, we get this, that OpenAI claims let GPT-3, that GPT-4 does even better. It scores 93% on an SAT reading exam and 89% on an SAT math exam. People have been asking, is it good at math, this chat robot? And yes, since January, it became good. So in the wings of these results of training on SAT exams sits educational technology, which we know well, like Khan Academy. So ChatGPT-4 was trained with a vast amount of videos and lessons available on Khan Academy, and clearly it helped. It scored 89% on the SAT exam, which is the top 11% of scores that humans achieve. So what does it then mean for us to know? In mass education system, where we tend to teach things which now can be done better by technology, by bots. Let's also look at what the history is of mass education. Mass, not maths. The education system as we know, it's only 200 years old. It's very young. No wonder that worldwide nobody knows how to do it exactly right for everybody. We have evidence of better practice and worse practice, but true right is not the realm of education. Before public education, formal education was just for the elite. It's an expensive business. It takes time. So if you wanted to study and become educated before public education, you had to be of independent financial means, or somebody had to sponsor so that you can spend your life to doing mathematics or to studying. And people died. It was expensive for life too. Those spearheads of innovation in the years 1600s, when we had an absolute explosion of knowledge and innovation, they were doing things that we know now was outright dangerous. Like Galileo, who got blind by looking at the sun, studying the sun through his telescope, and who was excommunicated by the church and bound for execution because of his opinions based on science. But now we have mass education. Where did that start? As industrialization changed the way we work, the need for universal schooling was evident. Factory owners required a docile, agreeable worker corps who would show up on time and do what their managers told them. Sitting in classroom all day with a teacher was good training for that. Early industrialists then were instrumental in creating and promoting universal education. I find that very, very interesting, that it is the industrial era that prompted mass education and not some innate need to know more. I find it also very interesting to read up on this history and reading that before mass education, it was deemed an insult that you actually had to take orders from somebody else, unless that person was a king that had power over you. So more than even the equalizing of academic attainment, it was equalizing in terms of social happenings. That was the objective of schooling. Sit still and listen and persevere with the task until you have finished. So opinion says now that we are moving into a new post-industrial era. We must reflect on how our education evolves to suit factory work. And we must be very seriously thinking about if that model still makes sense. And your comments about the role of ChatGPT and how that will influence education shows that you are aware that it's new frontiers that we are entering, which we didn't even know that would exist before November 2023. The world has really changed, and we must take new stock of mass education. Our second question, which we must consider, is what is mathematics really? Well, many definitions of mathematics is evident. Some says it's the study of patterns, as if patterns are out there. Others say it's the study of numbers and shape, and that's what we get in dictionaries like the Britannica Dictionary or online dictionaries. But mathematics itself is actually not about numbers or shapes. It's about the science of knowing. And the origin of that word is still available in Germanic languages, where the word is wiskunde. Wis meaning knowledge, kunde meaning study. So it's a human endeavor. It's the study of how we can know we know. And it has ever been a social endeavor. Something that's been developed through argument, through sharing ideas, through peer review, even before there were journals. And our curriculum subscribes to this, that mathematics is a human social endeavor. I wonder if the way that we teach it brings this aspect of mathematics to the fore, or whether we are teaching mathematics as some body of knowledge about numbers and figures that exist outside of our doing. And we must really think carefully about that if we want to have a role for children learning mathematics in this era of clever bots. So we come now to a complex systems view of education, and we will focus this on mathematics education. If you think a few years ago, solving a Rubik's Cube was seen as a sign of intelligence, but it's actually a simple system. It entails a procedure and not thinking. The solution is out there on the web. It's just dexterity now that makes one solver quicker than another. It's actually a simple system, although there are many interacting parts. Maybe at the best, we are currently teaching in our country mathematics as a Rubik's Cube. We can fill each block with a piece of content, and then we shuffle it around and we say yellow now represents geometry, blue represents algebra, red represents statistics, and we prefer it all together just like a solved Rubik's Cube. But unfortunately, computers can solve a Rubik's Cube now quicker than us, and they can make connections between those beautifully bracketed areas much quicker than we can do. So we need a different view. Consider the picture on the cover of this wonderful book about complexity in education by Brent Davis and Dennis Sumara. It's a fractal pattern which is self-similar at many levels. So the picture that you see in the big, you can zoom in and see it in the small parts. And it says what complexity allows us to reimagine education to be like. It allows us to start small with a simple input and idea, and then to create conditions for this idea to emerge and connect and create a beautiful patterned, growing, evolving set of knowledge. So objective knowledge is knowledge of what is out there, and our subjective understanding, how I think about it in others, in other words, in a complex system are seen as nested. I think we are more used to, at the best, I'm sorry, I'm just going back and I want to draw now. At the best, we are knowing systems that are saying, here is the objective world, there is our understanding, and somehow those two needs to be linked. So objective and our subjective world, they need to be linked, and experiments stood here. Now, complexity says to us, our subjective knowledge, our subjective understanding is all the time embedded in the world that we live in, and it emerges from our interaction with that world. And this subjective understanding may never exhaust objective knowledge out there, but it can grow. So you can imagine that this circle of subjective knowledge through education and through engaging in meaningful ways can over time approach the boundaries of objective knowledge that has been shared throughout the ages. Because it seems that the way knowledge was created through the ages, so that we now understand it as objective, like our number system, that the way it developed over time is self-similar to the way subjective understanding develops. And therefore, I don't mean that it's a direct map and that we can just teach mathematics in the way that it has been chronologically developed, but I mean that it is similar and self-similar. So complex system view also asks us to think of knowledge creation, teaching and learning through different kinds of network architecture. So how do we make it possible? So let's just think about it a little. So this one is centralized. In other words, the source of knowledge is here, and the other pieces of knowledge comes out of the source of knowledge. Maybe we can see Plato's idea that there's an ideal set of knowledge as a centralized system, because he believed that we cannot trust our interactions with the world. We must directly draw on this source of innate knowledge and ideal world that exists outside, independent of our bodies. We can also apply to this teaching and learning. If you are the teacher here, who's the node that decides what each learner must think about or do, you have a centralized system. A bit on, I think we've learned to work with a decentralized system, which you can think of as group work, making few groups, and from the group work, you will get influence on other students. And we know all the problems that we have with group work, where you assign roles and so forth. Complex systems asks us to consider distributed networks, where you may be the teacher there for this moment when you assign a task or where you choose a task, but then you allow interaction through all other agents. Students can talk to each other and share their knowledge. Tasks can relate to each other. Algebra is allowed to talk to statistics. So we have a system where there are lots of nodes. So if one of them cannot hold, if the teacher falls away, the structure can still hold. There's such a beautiful example in Montessori's education of primary school children, where she describes children who keep on working when the teacher is not there, keep on learning. How would we wish to see that? How would we wish to see that there is such interest in mathematics that learners take out their books and start talking before you even start the class or carry on without it? That is what a complex system can bring us. So what keeps a complex system healthy? And I know I am close to the end of my talk, and I invite you to think about this. So Waldrop says that complex emergence, that's my timer, complex emergence happens far from equilibrium. What does it mean to say thinking complex emergence happens on the edge, when new ideas and innovative genotypes, things are forever nibbling away at the edges of what is now status quo. In the constantly shifting zone between stagnation and anarchy, where a complex system can be spontaneous, adaptive, and alive. That is what we want in our classrooms. A system that is spontaneous, adaptive, and alive, not stagnant and dependent on a teacher, not wild and chaotic where there is no learning possible. So what keeps that healthy? 3 things: specialization, level hopping, and enabling constraints. And to close, I will quickly talk about this in the terms of our classrooms. So the first one is the tension of diversity and redundancy. What does it mean? Diversity means lots of different ideas in a class. So complete diversity means nobody shares anything. All topics are presented as distinct and new. Each member of a group has a different role. They can't share work. Nobody can help another. Their knowledge are not overlapping. You pose tasks that are closed and based on specialized procedures which we may not divert from. For learning, that is a chaotic system where nothing is overlapping. You may think your class is orderly, but in terms of learning over time, there are no connections. It's chaotic, and you see that chaos emerging when you do assessment at the end of the year. Complete redundancy, on the other side, means everybody knows the same limited information and procedures. So no discussion is needed and no growth is stimulated. Well, that works well in dangerous, volatile situations, but it is stagnant. No new knowledge can emerge. It's too quiet. It's too controlled. A healthy tension injects energy. And I want to take you to Peter Liljedahl's Thinking Classrooms, where he has, through rigorous research, identified how to make a classroom in the complex sense, a thinking classroom, where learners share their various knowledge, roles are interchangeable, tasks are opened up to invite discussion and comparison and new questions, where knowledge is emergent. So we don't want chaotic, we don't want stagnant, we want emergent. Trans-level learning, on the other side, means enabling neighbor interactions through your distributed control. Neighbor interactions means many ideas that can bump against each other, so that if any one idea falls flat, there are others to take its place. On a practical level, if somebody doesn't have a test book, others can share. If someone was absent, others can share. If one starts working on a problem and gets stuck, others can come in and share. If one asks or poses a question, it becomes the question of the whole group or class, and everybody owns it. That is distributive control. So it is clear from research in cognitive psychology as well as in education, educational wisdom and educational research, that learning requires slow thinking, which is triggered in problem situations, where our gray matter only weighs in because it's expensive in terms of energy and time. It only weighs in if we figure out something is wrong and there's something to think about. So Peter Liljedahl confirms that, or make use of that, when he describes the 11 aspects that makes a thinking classroom, where the types of tasks are open-ended, where the way in which tasks are given does not prohibit them from doing the tasks. So reading is not a problem because we give tasks in our words. Groups are formed randomly. Student workspace are open to everybody. The front of the class is not the power seat. Teachers answer questions very carefully, not to take away thinking and close tasks. Hints and extensions often asks to, is often just in the way of saying, so that learners can carry on, and autonomy of the students are not taken away. Well, you know of classrooms that are not thinking classrooms, and they are strikingly similar. And I think if we think of our own classes, we can recognize that there is so little autonomy in the way learners are allowed to work, that we do not have the energy in our class to teach and to learn. So how to notice emergence in mathematics learning? And this is true of Olympiad or challenge training and a thinking classroom in everyday life. Teachers and tutors must elicit learners' contributions before they teach, and their role must then be to listen, listen, listen. And they must teach only to draw together or level to the bottom, make sure everybody has the minimum knowledge while not constraining the access to bigger knowledge. And there are examples and ways to notice emergence from the beginning, from grade 1, from the moment a task is posed. We do not have to wait until the basics is learned before we can expect of learners, and should expect of learners, to be autonomous in their thinking. So what are the implications then? Bottom-up development is what is important also for the work of world in 21st century parlance. We must value learners' endeavors to understand the problem and to make connections. We must value and support slow thinking and not think that quick is clever. You as teachers must also value your own endeavors to understand the problem of teaching and not collapse teaching for thinking to telling to accept. Everything that we can tell is now in the brains of computers, while innovation is dependent on complexity. So to take away from this admittedly dense talk, on which I hope we can get more discussion as time goes on. Humans want to make sense. Computers do not. They just assimilate what is available to them. Making sense has generative potential, while computers, up to now in any way, can just replicate. They cannot create new arguments. They cannot create new mathematics. So how do we get this generative potential? The bottom line that's been available since the time of the Greeks and Socrates is bring problems into the classroom, not just for competitions, not just for the clever ones. Problems trigger our slow thinking. Things to remember does not. But then on the other hand, if we think that education is a societal matter, that a school is a microcosm of what is in our society, then it's vital that through organizations and initiatives like SASTA, we bring mathematics out of the classroom into our communities by applying, sharing, talking, celebrating, and not just competing. We must also give attention to the mathematical literacy in our communities. We cannot just accept that generations of learners have gone through schooling with a bare minimum of mathematical knowledge, 30%, 40% for a pass. We cannot just leave them there, not being able to contribute to society and to the kind of talk and kind of reasoning that our learners will be exposed to. We cannot teach mathematics without our larger communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lampen, for such an informative session. I'm going to allow only questions for Dr. Lampen. I'm hoping that you still have your questions on hold for Mr. Lesh, which we will be answering them later. For now, I'm going to give some few minutes just to Dr. Erna Lampen to respond to your questions if there are any questions. I'm hoping that we can be able to raise our hands if we are to ask questions, or we can even write on our chat box. I'm giving this platform for questions to Dr. Lampen. I'm only seeing one saying thank you, meaning that they have appreciated your talk, Dr. Lampen. Oh, here's a hand. Tevisan Sibanda. Tevisan Sibanda.
How are you, sir?
Thank you, sir. Can you read your question?
Yes, my question regards to from what doctor has presented to us, seems for a thinking classroom to be really thinking, you'd also have to consider the size of the classroom. As we are in the deep rural areas, we have got classes that are so big that we cannot even manage to handle them properly. How really can we make everyone get involved? Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I get that question often, and yes, the smaller your classroom up to a certain level, I suppose the more manageable. But complexity science gives us a way to think of that. So I want to bring up that picture of distributed control again. So if I can just share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see that.
The one that says trans-level learning? Yeah. So think of that picture, Mr. Sibanda. Think of that picture and let your creative energy flow. You are not able to be the teacher here where my mouse is and reach every student. It's simply not possible. But complexity science tells you it's also not healthy, that you must not see that as your job. What you must see as your job is to give tasks and get situations where the learners can draw on their knowledge to talk with each other and to help each other in settings that are as free as you could possibly make it for learners to reach each other. Well, in practical situations where I apply with my students Peter Liljedahl's principles, they work even in big classes. If we are creative, if we understand that it may be needed to also use the outside walls of a classroom as a learning space and put up surfaces there, cheap plastic that you put on the wall where they can write with Koki pens and rub down, so that the task of the learners is to engage with the mathematics before you start teaching. And I have seen it in research and I've done it in practice, how learners are suddenly getting the energy because they are free to see each other's work and to engage with each other's work. I want to tell you of an event that I had at Makupula High School here in Kayamandi, close to Stellenbosch where I work with my PGCE teachers in the afternoons. Think of your school in the rural area, and now you are in a semi-urban area where all the problems that you have are perhaps times 10 because of the density of the environment that these students live in. So the students that were in grade 10, the group that we helped, and they let us know that on this particular Tuesday, they needed help with solving equations. So we could do it on the straight old textbook way. We know the teacher had done that, and the students just maintain they don't understand. Following the examples, they don't understand. So we did Peter Liljedahl's way, and we put up cellophane on the walls, and we posed a question in everyday language. So not written, we wrote the bare minimum, but we said instead of solve for X, we said, can you find a number that will make this equation work? Solve for X for them just triggered a procedure. But when we posed it as a question, a problem, can you find a number that will make this equation work? Suddenly they didn't try to solve it because it was hard enough that they couldn't just estimate, or if they didn't know procedures, they wouldn't use it. And the children were standing on the desks to write on the walls, and I stood with a pen with folded arms. And so behind my left shoulder was one child, grade 10 man, listening but not contributing, while others are just swarming on the wall and writing things down and erasing and so on. And I suddenly felt the pen being pulled from my hand. And I was almost pushed aside as this person who had been standing behind my shoulder tried to get to the board. He had been standing quietly engaging with what the others were thinking without me making any input. And then there came a moment when he thought he had the idea to get us going. And he grabbed that pen from my hand and proceeded to work on the page in a way that helped other learners also to engage. And that was without my doing. So at least there at that board, at that moment where I was observing, something happened. The learners were engaging and they were using all their knowledge that they have to eliminate wrong ways of doing and reach a right answer. Now, if you can get groups like that going in your class, then your work is in the last 20 minutes to let them sit down and then say, okay, so what have we seen on the boards? And you summarize. It's worth trying. It's worth trying to do it even in small occasions. It's worth trying once a week until you get confidence. The point is, if we want our learners to have work, we cannot anymore say we can't make plans and we are just stymied by the situations that we're in. How are we then helping things forward? But that doesn't mean we must just accept that these type of situations. We must keep clamoring for more teachers, more knowledgeable teachers, more schools. But in the meantime, it's our moral duty to do whatever we can to keep learners thinking. And Peter Liljedahl's ideas and the idea of complexity, that learning in the large and learning in the learners' heads evolve in the same ways, and that we can actually should observe and should value it, that seems to become more and more evident.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lampen, for that response. Dr. Lampen, there's a question on the chat which says, in addition to the question asked, these learners are passive. How can one stimulate interest and get rid of the mindset that says mathematics is hard? Before you answer this question, there is also a question from Rebecca that I think I will give her a chance to answer. And based on the time that I have, I think these are the last two questions that we do have. Can you respond after Rebecca's question on the two questions that I've asked and then Rebecca? Okay, thank you. Rebecca?
Okay, so the group, is Rebecca going to ask the
Rebecca
question?
ask the question first?
Hi, I've got a question on curriculum. So now I understand how it's very important to do the group setting where you have learners help each other to understand the topic. But now, what if, because I teach grade 12 maths, okay, and I really do enjoy involving the kids in the whole teaching experience, but the curriculum is so tight, there's no time. And I mean, for me, the school setting that I'm in, I can allow the learners to come after school and we can sit and we can discuss. But for those schools that have time constraints and that have very dangerous, there's a school around our area that's like right on a highway, they don't have that opportunity. So I don't know, my question is, with the curriculum, how would you suggest that we could fit that type of teaching in?
Rebecca, that's also a question that I get all the time, and especially from my students. When I expose them to these ideas and to ways of teaching that are demanded by a 21st century view of life and that are necessary for our learners to one day have work, to ready them for the kind of thinking processes that they have to have in school. So my response is overall, and I'm asking you to take it in the fractal way down to the smallest possible thing you can do. The curriculum is seen as dense because it is atomized. Because we do not make connections between equations and functions, between solving for X and evaluating Y. We're not taking up what has been prepared for us in primary school through pattern work to learn functions. We do not have a holistic view of the curriculum. We do not prove in algebra, but we want them to prove in, learn proofs off by heart in geometry. So if we can understand that our curriculum, first and foremost, is about those principles that are in the preamble, and that the content requires of us to organize and make connections. I mean, how is it possible that we can learn triangle geometry, for example, in term 1, and then quadrilaterals in term 4, and then we may not refer back to triangles, where we have been priming in the curriculum in grades 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, transformations as a means to learn the properties of quadrilateral or figures. So how is it possible that we as teachers cannot say, take a triangle, different kinds of triangles, classes, that's why we learn their names, because if we vary their shape, they fall into different classes, and let's reflect them. Which quadrilaterals do we get? Do we get all of them? Let's rotate them. Which quadrilaterals do we get? We must look for ways to engage topics in the curriculum with each other. Now the time thing, then if we prepare so that we can make connections, already the sheer volume of the curriculum is reduced. Further, the time thing, you understand and we understand exponential growth. And we understand from a complexity view that small inputs can lead to big changes. And the key is here that I want to bring home. If you are willing to, or you ascribe to the notion that learners can think and that they will think if they have something to think about, a problem, they have something to think about, then if you allow ample time in the beginning for them to really make sense, half of what you see still need to be taught is eliminated. An example, I was in a class where we taught the effect of A on ax squared plus bx plus c. No, sorry, we'd start with line graphs. Okay, what's the effect of M? Well, it's a vertical stretch. Then it gets to quadratics. Now we have to teach them that it's a vertical stretch. We allowed lots of time with the linear function and challenge these learners. You think it looks like that graph is turning, rotating. Can you show me why it rotates? What's the angle? And help them to understand how do we do such an investigation. You keep a point X, and as you change the gradient, you follow the output value. And you will see that the output value gets proportionally higher, the proportion of M, the scale factor of M. The next time they had to learn about quadratics, it came by itself. They didn't have to learn it all together. They experiment, so we think it's going to be a stretch again. Well, find the stretch. They knew how to do the investigation. They found the stretch factor. So no talk about the arms get closer to each other. No talk about smileys and frownies or whatever, but real math. What's the stretch factor? And what happens when it's negative? And being able to find those points. So integrating the different representations and allowing ample time to make good sense of one key problem, which can then feed into others. It's possible, Rebecca, although I understand that in grade 12, the stakes are high for the exams. So I prefer, and I wish you the opportunity to teach again lower down, where you actually have that time. And if we can also just take seriously that our curriculum is a minimum assessment curriculum. So while we're assessing certain things at certain grade levels, nobody says we cannot make connections which will be addressed in depth and assessed the following year. It's possible. And if we don't start that in our classes in small ways and tell the stories, which is emergent behavior and complexity, there's no system which can top down make it happen. It depends on us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lampen.